want to tell you about the moment I realized my name wasn't on the wedding program. Not anywhere. Not as father of the bride. Not as stepfather. Not even as a guest. Just absent, like I had never existed at all. But before we get there, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I read every single one. It was a Tuesday morning in late April, and I was standing at the kitchen counter in my house in Decatur, Georgia, trying to figure out why my coffee tasted different. It took me a minute. I'd been using the same beans, the same grinder, the same cup I'd had since 2003. Then I realized it wasn't the coffee. It was the quiet. The house had that kind of silence that settles in when something is already over, even if you haven't been told yet. My stepdaughter Brianna was getting married that Saturday. 5 days out, the venue was booked at a place called Whitfield Manor in Alpharetta, 45 minutes north of us on a good traffic day. The flowers were arranged. The dress was paid for. The catering deposit, the rehearsal dinner at the Capitol Grill on Peachtree, the honeymoon suite at the St. Simond, Regis downtown, all of it was covered by me. 62 years old, 31 years as a letter carrier with the USPS before I retired, and every dollar I'd saved with any discipline went somewhere into that wedding before I ever saw invitation proof. I'd raised Brianna since she was 9 years old. Her mother, my wife Colette, had brought her into our marriage the way you bring something fragile, carefully, with both hands, watching to see if you drop it. I didn't drop it. I held on. For 18 years, I held on. Her biological father, a man named, well, I'm going to call him what Colette always called him when she thought I wasn't listening. Her biological father was a man who showed up in the margins, holidays sometimes. Her high school track meets twice that I can remember. He called on birthdays if he remembered. He lived down in Savannah, had a whole other life down there. 2 kids from a second relationship, a contracting business that Brianna once told me he ran out of his truck more than any office. He'd never paid a dime of child support because Colette had never pushed for it. When I asked her about that once, early in our marriage, she looked at me with that particular look she had. Patient, slightly disappointed, like I'd asked something naive, and said, "We don't need it. We have you. We have you." I should have written that down somewhere, framed it maybe, hung it somewhere I'd see it every morning. Let me go back to the beginning. I met Colette at a church cookout in 1999, Greater Antioch Baptist, off Memorial Drive. She was standing at the end of a folding table with a 9-year-old girl who had her same eyes and her same stubborn chin, and they were both trying to decide between 2 desserts like it was the most important decision of the day. I liked that about them, the seriousness of it. I walked over and said, "Get both." They looked at me like I was a stranger, which I was, and then the little girl laughed, and that was that. Brianna warmed up to me slowly, the way kids do when they've already learned that men leave. I understood that. I didn't push. I showed up consistently and let her decide when to let me in. By the time we got married, Colette and I, in the fall of 2001, Brianna had started saving me the seat next to her on the couch without being asked. That felt like more than most ceremonies. I moved them out of the apartment on Glenwood Avenue and into the house I've been buying in Decatur for 4 years. 3 bedrooms, a screened porch, a yard big enough to matter. That house was mine. My name, my mortgage, my weekend repairs, my sweat in the subflooring I'd replaced, board by board, the summer before they moved in. I was careful with that deed. My uncle had given me a piece of advice when I was young that I never forgot. He said, "Put your name on what you build. Love is real, but paper is what protects it." I kept my name on that house. Colette never asked about it. I took that as trust. I drove Brianna to school every morning for 6 years. I sat in the bleachers at her track meets, and there were many, because the child could run, genuinely run, the kind of speed that made people in the stands go quiet before they got loud. I helped her with college applications on the kitchen table, the one by the back window where the light came in good in the evening. She got into Georgia State on partial scholarship. I covered the rest. 4 years of tuition, housing, meal plans, textbooks, and 1 used Honda Accord I bought her junior year when the bus schedule stopped working around her nursing clinicals. She graduated with a BSN and a job offer from Piedmont Atlanta Hospital, and I sat in the front row at that ceremony, and I was not asked to move. She met her fiancé, I'll call him by what he was to me, her soon-to-be husband, at a hospital fundraiser 2 years after she graduated. He was a pharmaceutical sales rep from Marietta, good-looking in the way that makes you slightly suspicious, the kind of man who shook hands too firmly and smiled before he'd heard what you said. I kept that opinion to myself. Brianna loved him. That was what mattered. Or at least, that was what I told myself. The engagement happened fast. 6 months in, he proposed at a restaurant in Buckhead. Colette cried when Brianna called us. I held the phone and felt that particular warmth you feel when something you've quietly worked toward your whole adult life arrives without fanfare. Then the planning started. And slowly, so slowly, I almost didn't notice. I began disappearing from it. It started small. Brianna and Colette were driving up to look at venues and I wasn't included, which I understood, mother-daughter thing, I thought. Then the florist meetings, the cake tasting. I'd ask how things were going and Colette would say, "Fine, baby, we've got it," and I believed her because I wanted to. Then the catering deposit came back to me as a Venmo request from Colette's account, and then the photographer deposit, and then a number from the venue that made me sit down for a moment. I paid all of it. I didn't keep a running total because that's not what fathers do. That's what Colette had always told me. I found out about the wedding program on a Wednesday night, 4 days before the ceremony. Brianna had texted Colette a screenshot of the final program layout. I saw it because Colette left her phone on the kitchen counter face up and walked into the other room. I wasn't snooping. I was reaching past it for a blast. But the screen was lit and the image was right there. The cover read, "The Wedding of Brianna Lynette Moore and James Eldon Crawford III." Inside, the wedding party. Inside, the order of service. Inside, acknowledgements from the couple. Under a section titled, "To Our Fathers," there were two names. One was her soon-to-be husband's father, a man named something Crawford. I didn't know him well. The other was her biological father, with a full paragraph. Something about distance and time and roots. I don't remember the exact words. I remembered the feeling. Like touching a door you thought was yours and finding someone else's lock on it. My name was not there. Not in the program. Not in the acknowledgements. Not in the thank you section at the back, which listed the venue coordinator, the florist, the DJ, and the woman who made the wedding cake, but not the man who had written the checks for all of it. I set the phone down. I walked out to the screened porch. I sat in the chair I always sat in, the green one with the worn arm, and I looked out at the backyard in the dark. Colette came in 20 minutes later, looking for her phone. She found me on the porch. "What are you doing out here?" she asked. She had that voice she used when she sensed something but didn't want to name it. Thinking, I said, "About what?" I looked at her. She looked back. She was still a beautiful woman, my wife. Same eyes she'd passed to Brianna. Same chin. Same particular kind of patience that I'd spent 18 years mistaking for peace. I said, "The program." Her face didn't change much. Just a small settling, like when a house adjusts to temperature. She said, "We ran out of space on the layout. You understand? You've always been there, baby. You don't need a program to prove it." I didn't say anything else. I went to bed. She kissed my forehead. I stared at the ceiling fan turning slow in the dark. I did not sleep. By the time the sky started going gray, I had made some decisions. I am not a man who yells. Never have been. 31 years of delivering mail in heat and cold and rain and ice taught me that the work gets done whether you announce it or not. The mail doesn't care about your feelings. It just has to arrive. That morning, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my financial advisor, a man I'd worked with for 11 years out of an office off Cascade Road. I told him I wanted to restructure the education savings account I'd set up for Brianna when she was 12. She'd already graduated, so the funds, roughly $42,000 I'd kept there as a graduate school contingency, had never been touched. I told him to move it. He asked where. I told him. He didn't ask why. He'd known me long enough. The second call was to a contractor I trusted, a man from my church who'd done work on my house twice before. I told him I wanted an assessment done, market value, what it would take to make it show ready. He said he could come by Thursday. I said good. The third call was to my eldest sister up in Cleveland, Ohio. I told her I might need to stay with her for a while. She said, "How long is a while?" I said I wasn't sure yet. She said, "Come on." And that was all she needed to say. I went to the wedding. Of course I went. I'm not a man who makes scenes. I put on the charcoal suit that Colette had picked out from Dillard's 6 weeks earlier, the one with the faint pinstripe. I drove to Alpharetta. I parked in the lot behind the venue and walked in and sat where I was told. The usher, a young man in a white vest, led me to a row on the bride's side. 7th row. I looked at him. He said, "There are reserved rows up front for immediate family." I said, "I'm her stepfather." He looked at his clipboard. He said, "I'm sorry, sir. Those seats are marked." I sat in the 7th row. I watched her biological father walk Brianna down the aisle. He was wearing a tan suit. He looked good in it. He had the ease of a man who understands how to perform for an audience, which I suppose was a skill he had cultivated by attending the performances that mattered without doing the rehearsals. He had Brianna on his arm, and she was radiant, genuinely radiant, and I am telling you with complete honesty that the most painful thing in that moment was not my anger. It was my love, still there, right there in my chest, 18 years of it, sitting in the 7th row. At the reception, I was seated at table 11. The centerpiece was a small arrangement of white roses and greenery. The table included 2 of Colette's cousins. I'd met twice, a co-worker of Brianna's and a couple who turned out to be neighbors of the groom's parents. The head table was visible from where I sat. I could see Colette's face in profile. She was laughing at something her biological father was saying. He had a champagne glass in his hand and the ease of a man who arrives for the trophy without running the race. Brianna gave a toast. She thanked her husband's family. She thanked her mother. She thanked her biological father by name, with a full sentence about how grateful she was that he had walked her down the aisle. She said, "Thank you for being here for the moment that mattered most." I was at table 11. She did not mention me. There was applause. There was music. There was a 4-course dinner I barely tasted. At some point, Brianna came over to table 11 and hugged me. She smelled like the perfume I'd bought her for Christmas 3 years running. She said, "Thank you for coming. Everything is so beautiful." I nodded. I said, "You look wonderful." She moved to the next table. I drove home alone. Colette texted that she would be staying at her sister's that night with some of the out-of-town family. I sat in the driveway for a long time. The engine ticked. The neighbor's porch light was on. The house was dark. I went inside. I sat at the kitchen table in my chair, the one by the back window. I took off the pinstripe jacket and hung it on the chair back. I put my hands flat on the table. I looked at them for a while. These are hands that carried mail through ice storms. That replaced sub-flooring board by board. That helped a 9-year-old girl with math homework and later with college essays and later still with the resume she'd sent me in a panic at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night. I didn't throw anything. I didn't call anyone. I sat in the quiet of a house I'd built and I let the truth settle into me fully for the first time. I had been funding a story I was not in. The following Monday, I called the contractor back and told him to start the assessment. The appraisal came in strong. The Decatur market was doing what the Decatur market had been doing for the last decade, rewarding the people who had the patience to hold. I'd been holding for 23 years. The number the appraiser gave me made me sit down in the driveway, on the tailgate of my truck, and look at it on the paper for a long time. I listed the house on a Friday. My realtor, a woman from my church, someone I trusted, who had been in residential real estate in DeKalb County for 20 years, walked through every room, asked her questions, made her notes. In the kitchen, she paused and looked at me. She said, "Does your wife know?" I said, "She knows I'm done." The listing went live that afternoon. Colette found out on a Sunday. She called 11 times between noon and 3 o'clock. I answered the 12th. She said, "What did you do to our house?" I said, "It was my house. You just lived in it." She started in then 18 years of marriage. How could I? What about her? What about Brianna? I listened. I let her get through most of it. Then I said, "Colette, I sat in the 7th row at my daughter's wedding. The program you helped write didn't have my name in it. The florist was in there. The DJ was in there. I was not in there. So let's not talk about what was ours." She hung up. Brianna called 2 hours later. Her voice was tight, the way it got when she was trying not to cry and not quite succeeding. She said, "Why are you selling the house?" "What happened?" "Mom is devastated." I said. "Did your mother tell you about the program?" A pause. I said, "I sat in the 7th row, Brianna. At your wedding. I found out when an usher checked a clipboard. I raised you for 18 years. I paid for that wedding. My name wasn't in the program." The line was quiet. I said, "Who walked you down that aisle?" She didn't answer. I said, "I know who. I was there." 7th row. I saw the whole thing. Her breathing changed. She said, "I didn't think." I said, "That's the thing. Nobody thought. Nobody thought I'd mind. Nobody thought I'd mind. Nobody thought I'd do anything about it. That's been the assumption the whole time." She hung up. I did not feel satisfied. I want to be clear about that, because these stories sometimes get told like revenge is clean, like it ties up neat and leaves you feeling righteous. It doesn't. There's no version of this where a man in his 60s sells the home he spent 2 decades building and feels good about it. I felt clear. There's a difference. Satisfaction is warm. Clear is just accurate. The offer came in 10 days. A family from Stone Mountain moving to Decatur for the school district. They had a young daughter and a set of twins on the way. Their agent called mine and said they were ready to move fast. I said yes. I signed the papers on a Thursday. The title company was off Candler Road. Small office, fluorescent lights. The kind of industrial carpet that's been there since 1987 and will outlast everyone in the room. My hand was steady. I signed every page. I packed over 4 nights. Only what was mine? My tools? My father's watch, a Seiko he'd worn every day until the day he died. The photographs of my mother, a box of records from before the marriage, the green porch chair. I left everything else exactly as Colette had arranged it. Every candle, every throw pillow, every frame on the wall. I left them the context of a home without the man who'd made the payments. I drove to Cleveland. My sister had the guest room made up with the quilt our mother had sewn, the one with the deep, clean patches. I slept for 12 hours the first night and woke up to the smell of coffee and Lake Erie outside the window, and something that wasn't happiness but was the beginning of a direction. Colette's lawyer sent a letter 2 weeks later. Marital home, abandonment, equitable distribution. I sent it to my attorney. My attorney sent back the deed, the original purchase agreement dated 1998, and the full mortgage payment history. Every payment made solely from my account for 23 years. Maryland has one doctrine. Georgia has another. But the principle held. The house was mine. The lawyer got quiet. Brianna drove up to Cleveland in November. She came alone. She knocked on my sister's door on a Saturday morning when the sky was the color of old pewter and the wind off the lake had a bite to it. She had bags under her eyes. She looked like someone who had spent several months finding out things she hadn't wanted to know. We sat at my sister's kitchen table. My sister made coffee and left us to it. Brianna said, "Mom finally told me everything. About the money, the tuition, the accounts, the wedding." I said, "I didn't keep secrets." She didn't ask. Brianna said, "I didn't know about the program." I told her I wanted to thank you. She said she'd handle the layout. I looked at the table. She said, "And my father, my biological father, he called me once after the wedding. One call. I didn't pick up. He texted me twice in August, something about visiting Savannah. I haven't heard from him since. I didn't say anything. I let the silence do what it needed to do." She said, "I should have said something at the ceremony. I knew you were back there. I kept looking for you. I didn't know you were in the 7th row until after. And when I figured it out, I didn't do anything. And I should have. I said, 'You're right. You should have.'" She looked up. I said, "I'm not going to tell you it's fine. It wasn't fine. But I'll tell you it's something I can work with, if you're willing to do the work." Not just this conversation, the actual work. She said, yes. I said, then let's start there. She hugged me at the door when she left, longer than the reception. Both arms, nothing held back. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was an agreement to begin one. That's harder and more honest, and it's what I had to offer. These days, I'm renting a place in East Nashville. I moved from Cleveland after 3 months, decided I wanted warmth and a city with some life to it. The apartment has big windows and good light in the morning, and a kitchen where I've been teaching myself things I always said I didn't have time to learn. Turns out I had time. I just didn't have space. There's a man in my building, a retired school teacher named Lloyd, who plays chess on the courtyard bench on weekend mornings. We've been playing every Saturday for 6 weeks. He doesn't talk much during games, and neither do I. And there is real comfort in that. Colette and I are in the process of divorce. It is not ugly. It is just finished. Sometimes finished looks like ugly from the outside. From the inside, it just looks like accurate. Brianna calls every other week. The calls are short still, 20 minutes or so, but they're consistent. She called last Tuesday to tell me she'd been accepted to a nurse practitioner program at Emory. She said she'd been thinking about going back for 2 years but never felt steady enough. I told her I thought she was ready. She said, I've always worked better when I felt like somebody believed I would make it. I said, I know that. I've always known that. There was a pause. She said, I know. That was enough for that Tuesday. I think about the seventh row sometimes. I don't obsess over it, but it comes back to me in quiet moments, the way a particular kind of pain does. Not sharp anymore, just present, a reminder, what I've come to understand, sitting in these good light mornings in Nashville at 63 years old, is that the man who shows up every ordinary day is doing something the man who shows up for the ceremony cannot replicate. The graduation, the wedding, the milestone. Those are easy to attend. What's hard is the Tuesday morning with the math homework. The Wednesday night at the track meet in February when it was 40 degrees and the program was already 40 degrees and the program was already 40 minutes late. The Saturday afternoon fixing the rear bumper of a Honda Accord in a parking lot in College Park because she couldn't afford the shop estimate. Those days are invisible until they're gone. And when they're gone, you realize the visibility was never the point. Showing up was the point. For 18 years, I showed up because she needed someone to, and I was able to, and I chose to. Not for credit, not for a line in a program. For her. I still chose that, even after everything. If you've ever been the man in the seventh row, in a wedding, in a family, in a life that rearranged itself when something more convenient arrived, I hope this reminds you of something. You don't have to announce your value to a room that's already decided not to see it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop holding up a structure that was built on the assumption that you never would. Walk out into the open air. Take the deed with you. Find a kitchen with good light. That's enough. That's more than enough. Thank you for watching. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Uncle Russell. Every voice here matters, including yours.